Back tonight here on In Focus now, there's much soul-searching that needs to happen and anguish in the immediate aftermath of the Enyobeni tavern tragedy that claimed the lives of 21 young people over just a week ago in East London. But many observers are focusing on the extent to which law and order and governance may have failed to prevent the monumental loss of life. Joining us now to share his insight on governance issues is the director of the Student Governance and Development at Nelson Mandela University, Dr. Bernard Sebake. Dr. Bernard, good evening and thank you very much for your time and for joining us tonight here on In Focus. The conversation is now turning into something that is speaking, for example, about changing laws or maybe putting tougher laws in place, because that would have prevented, I suppose, the situation where we've got young people going into a tavern and consuming alcohol. But there's also a question around whether or not there are taverns who are profiteering from selling alcohol to minors. There's also a conversation that we need to have, for example, around issues of what is plaguing communities, what is missing in communities that allowed for our kids not to be playing as kids, but to rather want to engage in adult activity. Then the president suggesting the nation to have a conversation about the changing of the laws of the drinking age. Are we prescribing the wrong medicine to an issue that is a social, socio-economic issue, maybe?
Good evening as well, Thabo, and thanks for having me. It depends from which vantage point are you, departing from. A number of issues that we've really reflected, Thabo, are at the center of this challenge of really moral decaying in our society that at the end compromise young people in the context of the tragedy that we are now talking about. Let me first move from an angle, Thabo, to try to really explain the kind of society we live in order to usher the essence of multiplicity of variables that contribute to these appalling conditions we are talking about. The first issue, Thabo, is about really public education that is able to restore, the challenges that society is realizing. Those are part and parcel of the role that's supposed to be played by education to build young people who are able to understand the future ahead of them and how to uphold in society. And that also requires the parents to play a role. That's one variable on its own. The question of poverty, yes, establishments such as tavern, particularly in areas in our country, are resorting to illegal means, indeed, of selling alcohol substance to young people who are not prescribed age in terms of the prescription of the law. And this is a means of, acquiring the whole question of, economic drive, but in an illegal means. And that as well require the accompaniment of parents to try to play their role in order to ensure that we are all at the center involved in growing this young generation for the greater good of the country.
Right.
And in essence, then this contributes to, from the governance point of view, to what we call developmental state that is hitting the slack.
Yeah. So what are the shortfalls then in governance? I mean, you already mentioned the issue of education. So there are some who say there was failure at governance level for the young people themselves to govern themselves, and you've already mentioned that could be a contribution of a lack of education on what is productive in terms of governing oneself. But there is also a sense that there was a failure of governance from the parents' side. I don't know to what extent would they need to be capacitated to be able to govern their affairs of their households and where their kids are at a particular time, and not to allow them to go astray. And then there was a governance failure in as far, for example, as the government itself issuing of licenses to an establishment that is clearly not properly equipped, not well ventilated, and so on and so forth. How do we address these various parts of governance failure?
I think, Thabo, let me start from the side of the parents. For the community that understand that we live together, if I'm a parent to my own kids, the kid next door is also my kid. And as a result, we live in a society that strives social cohesion. Then in that instance, I think we are not performing well. It's everybody for himself, and the rest shall follow.
Yeah.
On the other hand, yes, I don't want to traverse the question of acquiring of license. Let me deal decisively with the issue of oversight on the side of government in order to ensure that some of these establishments that begin to breach compliance as it is required by legislation, decisive action is taken. However, government alone will not deliver the very same essence of enforcing oversight. Government does not have officials. We only depend on the police that have to do patrols. But if I stay in the vicinity of this kind of an establishment and I see a number of young people or kids visiting that establishment, what is my sense of conscience as a parent? I think building a conscious society that understands the essence of social cohesion, that society then will uphold the issue of really taking care of each other, and the whole question of governance will then be understood as not an issue of one-sided establishment, but for all of us, we've got that responsibility to take care of one another. That is for self-organization.
Self-organization. So some of the speakers, including the president, including the minister of police, and others, including tavern owners, talking of a promise to come back and implement some action to prevent this from happening again. If we are talking action, where do we begin to act?
I think let me start, Thabo, by saying there are two sets of coins in terms of governance and a government that is able to champion what we call developmental society in this instance. And why I'm saying this, there are instances where political representatives, or rather public representatives, have this indication and passion about really taking care of ordinary citizens. But the capacity of those who are involved on a day-to-day basis on the ground do not speak to the wishes or what the political leadership have already reflected. That's the first challenge that we are dealing with. The moment we deal with these two variables, we will not have people waiting for too long for answers that they cannot get, and that, I repeat, it compromises a capable state that is able to deliver the very same essence and comprehend and comfort the society and the community at the time of need. Yeah. So that's the fundamental challenge, and that's where we must start.
In terms of then accountability, what role does accountability play in governance? There seems to be a shortfall in terms of impactful and effective tools of accountability in all kind of spaces in this particular matter. When is the right time to demand that accountability? How do we demand that accountability?
Thabo, accountability is part and parcel of good governance. It is required at all material times there's no good timing about it or bad timing about it. As a result, one would then argue that the problem with accountability being compromised from time to time, it is because of the inability to apply what we call consequences management. Because if there's no accountability, lives can be lost. Worst scenario could happen. And as a result, where we find that we can be proactive to a particular extent if we prioritize accountability. That's why accountability remains a beacon to deliver us to good governance.
Dr. Sebake, nicely put. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on. Dr. Bernard Sebake, Director, Student Governance and Development at the Nelson Mandela University.